Electra in Blue sounds like it could be a razor, but it's actually a movie about cops on motorcycles in Arizona. Mainly, it's about one short officer named John Wintergreen, played by Robert Blake. I think this movie was on trend when it came out in 1973, but since then, it's been somewhat forgotten, and that's perfect for this channel. I think this is a pretty cool movie. There might be a couple of parts that fall a bit short. I don't like the ending, but overall, there is a lot more to the movie than I had expected. If you think this is just some kind of genre film, think again. First things first, this movie sometimes gets compared to Easy Rider. Like Easy Rider, Electra in Blue features motorcycles. It's sort of about the counterculture. The ending is kind of similar, and the poster for Easy Rider actually shows up in Electra in Blue at one point. Of course, there is a fundamental difference between these movies, which is that one of them is about the misfits, the subversive folks on the motorcycle, and this one is about police. It's about cops. How does that work? To be honest, I wasn't really thinking about Easy Rider at all when I watched this movie. I think they're kind of different. But this was still my frame for the movie. How do you make a cop film in 1973, in particular one that's going to be kind of trendy? What does a trendy cop movie look like in 1973? What would it look like now? In some ways, this question is still kind of relevant. I was sort of expecting this movie to take sides within the first few seconds, to show us its allegiances, but it actually holds its cards pretty close to the chest. The film opens up with a bunch of close-ups showing all kinds of domestic stuff, like breakfast sizzling in the pan. There is a bit of a Western theme from the very beginning. They're motorcycle cops patrolling the West, and they're going to kind of be painted as cowboys. There's a great shot at the beginning of the film. It starts almost in black and white. It's this huge wide shot of Monument Valley, and as it gets more and more saturated, you see way off in the distance a Volkswagen bus driving up. It's all painted. It drives up into frame and past the camera eventually. The music, or the scene, is then going to cut to a shot of an American flag. Maybe this sounds a bit on the nose, but I think the movie actually does a nice job playing with some new images and with some old images. The Western frontier, the VW bus, the rock concert. The American flag is in the bedroom of Robert Blake's character, John Wintergreen. Eventually, he's going to get out of bed and go to work via an interesting montage where he puts on his uniform, which is again likened to that of a cowboy, to this Western thing. He's going to walk out into the gleaming sun to a row of pristine motorcycles. And at this point, it's still not totally clear if we have a satirical angle here. In some ways, it's a little on the nose, it's a little over the top, but it could just be a cop movie. At this point, I was still trying to figure out what sort of movie I was watching. Next, Wintergreen and all the other cops, they're going to line up, and their sergeant, or whoever, their leader, is going to come out, and he starts yelling insults at them like a drill instructor. It turns out he's preparing them for the concert they're going to police that weekend. And this is the beginning of a discussion on self-confidence and law enforcement. It's a nice selection of colorful language from the era. The acting of this cop is pretty on point, too. There's some pretty darn good police impressions throughout this whole movie, really. Here, the film is clearly invoking this tension, some sort of generational tension, different parts of the culture, but it still hasn't exactly taken sides. Okay, seems a little bit satirical in some ways, but it's not exactly clear. Next, John is going to go out to do his traffic patrols. He's going to write some tickets, and this is where we really start to see the magic of Robert Blake. Blake is an enigma. Of course, I talked about him and his life and his wife in depth when I reviewed In Cold Blood, so I'm not going to go through all of that again, but he's, I think, really good in this movie. He's sort of puzzling, though, which might put some people off. He's hard to read. Is he the one upstanding cop? Is he a schmuck? Insecure? Naive? It's a great character. I mean, you wonder, is he smart? Like, that's one question you might ask, and it's a little bit hard to answer that question in this movie. The film is maybe slightly less dramatic than it could be, and partly this might be because Wintergreen is a little underdefined. I never really felt like I knew him or that I knew what he was going to do. But it's still really fun to discover this guy. It's a good character study. It's kind of a legendary character that I'm surprised is not a little bit more widely known because, yeah, sort of iconic. I think what I'm really getting at here, though, with all this sort of ambivalence, is that the director, James William Guercio, he understood what audiences were going to be looking for. He was reading the room, I think, a little bit, reading the theater in terms of what was on people's mind with police and motorcycles in 1973, and he plays with it a little bit. Not in the sense that he's like teasing or being coy, but, I think a lot of lesser movies from this era would feel like they had to align themselves somehow with these social conflicts. They'd have to take sides, or that they at least need to address them in extreme terms. This movie doesn't really do that, and I think there's subtlety here, and there's even some artistry here. So I think it's a strength of the movie that it keeps you guessing a little bit. While we're on the subject of the director, let me tell you that this is a great movie to watch if you're a fan of the band Chicago or the band's Chicago Transit Authority, because this director produced a bunch of their records, and Peter Cetera, the bass player who became the vocalist after Terry Kath passed away, he has a fairly significant part in the film. If you don't like bass players, though, don't worry, because Terry Kath, still alive, he's in the movie too, along with a few other members of Chicago. This is maybe a little bit of a hint about the ultimate perspective of this film. This guy's friends with Chicago. They're in the movie. It's probably not going to be this like super regressive old school thing. Guercio also composed and conducted the score for this movie, which I think is above average. There's some nice use of a synthesizer. I like the music. There's also a great selection of like pop songs in the movie too, steering away from some of the cliched stuff that you might hear in a lot of movies. Guercio wasn't a very experienced director. I've seen mixed reports on whether he actually knew how movies were made, but one way or another, this movie got made, and it turned out, I think, pretty good. Before too long, I do think you'll start to figure out the picture a little bit where this movie's allegiances are. John Wintergreen is kind of a goofy guy, a little bit naive. He has some really great little monologues in this movie. I haven't seen this movie described as a comedy really anywhere, but I think it is quite funny. There are one or two sections that are clearly comedic, but most of it leans more towards the confounding, which I think is a type of humor that has aged really well. And there's a few great scenes in this movie. There's a fantastic scene where Wintergreen and his partner are stopping in an ice cream van, and there's two women behind Wintergreen, and he's sort of chatting them up, and he's saying, "Oh, do you know that me and Alan Ladd are the same height?" Not true, by the way. Robert Blake was shorter than Alan Ladd, I think. But did you know we're the same height? And just the way he talks to the girls is, I don't know. It's really something. It's kind of confounding, like I said, but wow, what a great character. He gets to the front of the window, and what he orders is, again, just kind of ridiculous. Not in a over the top way, not really in an overtly comedic way, but man, this movie has some great scenes, and Robert Blake is at his enigmatic best in this movie. Wintergreen is a little bit of a schmuck. He's unflappable. That's one thing that's interesting about him, is he's unflappable, but he's also kind of clueless. But he's not a bad guy, I think, compared to some of his colleagues who tend to be pretty masculine, pretty corrupt. They're cowboys, and not in the romantic way, full of ego, full of bravado. That's a big part of the movie, bravado. This movie continues to have the Western look throughout. It's filmed in a bunch of classic locations, Arizona, in Monument Valley as well. A couple locations that aren't that close to each other in real life, I believe. But I suspect they maybe include these in a nod to some of the traditional Westerns that left some geographic details in the dust, despite, in some ways, being really attached to the West. Some of these films also really skewed people's perception of where things were. Anyway, this Western angle grounds the film in a certain type of Americana. Not too hard to see how this is working, maybe a bit on the nose, but I think it's okay. Almost as soon as you start to get your head around the dynamic in this film, this dynamic between Wintergreen and his partner, the movie is going to introduce a more serious plot line, a crime, a mystery that someone has to solve. I'm not going to go into this, but I thought it's a decent way to structure the movie. It's not the most tightly wound plot. It kind of dissolves into 70s ennui a few times. And like I said, this movie is maybe not as dramatic as it could be, but I think they do a good job balancing a few different things. Social tensions, an indirect look at the counterculture, something kind of satirical, and of course, a murder. There's a little bit of an action movie here and even an exploitation film undercurrent. This movie really balances a lot of different genres, or hops between them. I mentioned the indirect look at the counterculture. I think this is one of the things that sets this movie apart from a lot of others. I mentioned already that there's something different going on compared to Easy Rider, right? To me, this movie didn't seem that much like Easy Rider, even though, yeah, there's some overt similarities. So I I was really thinking about why didn't it seem that similar to me? And I think one of the pieces of that is that in Easy Rider, like in most countercultural movies, the focus is really on how extreme the lifestyles of the characters are. Like the main characters, the hippies or whatever, the bikers, how extreme their life is, how little inhibition they have, how much they push the envelope. This movie, on the other hand, it shows some countercultural stuff kind of from the outside, and it actually seems surprisingly subdued. It doesn't seem that extreme or that over the top. We catch some glimpses of bikers, of some kind of commune, but all the people there seem kind of normal, pretty chill people. Of course, what the movie is going to focus on here is the behavior of the police, of the cops, which doesn't read exactly as like a morality play, but it's pretty ugly. In a lot of movies, even some subversive ones, the hippies are the weird guys. They're the ones pushing the envelope. In this movie, it's kind of the opposite. This is really a story about the strange ways, the extreme ways of the police, where the hippies kind of seem like the normal ones, like the grounded ones. That's an interesting reversal. I think it's kind of cool. One theme that floats through this movie is what it means to be part of an institution. It's pretty clear that Wintergreen is in tension as a cop. To some degree, he has to deal with colleagues that he doesn't really agree with, and he runs an awful risk, I guess, of something inside of him being traded in for something else. I don't want to overstate this exactly, because it's not like Wintergreen is some white knight who's, crestfallen at the poor behavior of his colleagues. He is a pal of some of these guys. He does participate in some of these things. He's maybe confused at best about what to do in these situations. But nonetheless, this question of how to be a part of an institution is a big part of the movie. In one of the most decisive scenes in the film, Wintergreen and one of the detectives go to some farming commune. They're looking for a guy that they suspect is associated with this commune. He's one of the suspects in this murder. At first, Wintergreen asks around, doesn't really get any information out of anyone, and then the detective, the big guy, comes out. And this is a guy with tons of bravado. It's his career, essentially. It's to be a big man. This is a kind of an electric scene in some way. He takes out his gun, and he dumps all the bullets on the floor. He says, I don't want to shoot anyone today. But things do get a bit ugly. I won't tell you exactly what happens. A bit later in the movie, you should just go watch the scene. But after his investigation walks up, this is, I think, a brilliant moment. After the investigation is finished, the detective walks back to the car where Wintergreen is standing, and he stops and he whispers something to Wintergreen. The director does not let us hear what he says. You just see him, saying something, and you wonder, what did he say? Wintergreen comes walking back to the group of people, walking back to these people on the commune, kind of slowly, kind of skulking back. He walks to the middle of the circle, and he bends over to pick up the bullets that the detective dropped on the ground. You get the feeling that he doesn't agree with how the detective has acted, how he acted towards the people on this commune, but also how he's conducted the investigation, and how he's acted towards Wintergreen, towards his colleague, right? What kind of institution is this, right? A club full of bullies? Wintergreen seems not quite embarrassed. That's not self-conscious, maybe, in some ways, to have all these people watch him pick up the bullets, to see that he is a lackey for this guy, right? I tend to think that the way a lot of people decide what they should do with their time is by looking around at whatever community they're in. You show up some new place, and you see what are the people who are in the highest regard doing, or what are they trying to do? What are the cool people trying to do? What are the people with status striving for? Well, try to do that. A lot of people, that's how it works out. Wintergreen wants a transfer to homicide. He wants to get off the bike, but that seems to change. It's a mature thing to do, to realize that what you thought you wanted was not what you actually wanted. I love hearing stories about that. And I think this movie is one of them. It's not an over-the-top morality play. It's not a parable about the cops and the counterculture, but there is in here sort of a personal story about someone coming to terms with something. I don't have a lot more to say about Electra Glide in Blue. It's a bit of a gem, but it's not astoundingly deep. I didn't like the ending. It seems like they maybe couldn't think of an ending, which might hint at an overall lack of decisiveness. Ironically, the ending was based on a true story, even though it seems like one of the more outlandish things that happens in the film. This movie kind of wanders around. Like I said, it crosses between a few different genres. If you're just looking for an intense thriller, this might not be it. But in general, I think that Electra Glide in Blue has aged well and is worth checking out.